Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Place, and I'm speaking to you from my son's room actually because I've had computer problems. But I am totally thrilled today because we have Nora Zelevansky and her absolutely incredible book, Competitive Grieving, which I love so much that I blurbed. So I want to tell you, Nora's the author of the novels Besides Competitive Grieving, which is out now and you should all buy it immediately, Will You Won't You Want Me, and Semi-Charmed Life. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Elle, Town and Country, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Vanity Fair. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, 2 kids, and an enormous cat, Waldo. It's always like the most interesting thing. I hope Waldo, if Waldo is there with you, that he can make an appearance maybe. Yeah. Okay, so Competitive Grieving, I absolutely loved it. And it was also one of Entertainment Weekly's best May reads. So welcome and thank you for being here. We're really excited.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited
to
be here.
Absolutely. So I always want to know, like, what was haunting a writer into, or obsessing a writer into writing their book? There's usually like some seed where you think, this is what I want to write about. Competitive Grieving is very much a book about death, but for a book about death, it has a whole lot of life in it and wit and humor, which I love. So I wanted to know, like, tell us the origin story of this great novel.
So it's in 2017. It was a crazy year for me. I was pregnant with my second child. And I mean, it was a crazy year for a lot of people because the country had just changed hands.
Right.
And everybody was feeling, I think, a bit untethered. And one of my best friends died.
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, that.
So that'll obsess you with death, you know? But he was like the most sort of vibrant, brilliant, like, he was like just one of those people that makes like the world more colorful. You know what I mean?
Right.
And also like the funniest person I have ever known. And so ultimately, in the wake of his passing, there was what felt to me like a lot of sort of competitive grieving, like a lot of people vying to be seen as having as like significant in his life, wanting to plan, you know, the funeral and the memorial, or sort of stake their claim to their relationship with him. And it got kind of ugly, but also absurd. And so I ended up thinking about that a lot, and ultimately literally said to my friend, you know what? I'm going to write a book called Competitive Grieving. So for the first time in my life, I had the title first.
That's funny.
But I think, like, because he was such a magnetic person, and because I guess I tend to personally really like comedy and like, and that kind of, those kinds of stories, that it was sort of more of a, even though the story is not about him or my story, but because that was the jumping off point, that it was just like a fitting tribute that it be a sort of upbeat book, even though it was about loss.
Yeah, you know, I want to talk more about that whole thing about what happens to the people who are the survivors, because there's so much in this book about people laying claim to Stuart, the guy who dies, because I know either one or two things happens. Either if someone who dies isn't such a nice person, all of a sudden he's a hero.
Right.
And people always start to change their memories sort of about that. I love the whole thing because it seemed like you were talking about the nature of how much we really can know a person in life and how that changes in their death and what's real and what isn't real. And, you know, your main character is Ren, who I absolutely loved. How much of Ren is you?
I mean, Ren definitely, even if she was me, it would be me in like a different stage of my life, I think. But I definitely, the way that she processed her grief, I guess, is maybe a bit like the way that I did. And what you're saying about this notion of like how well you can really know somebody, that's definitely, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like that's something that really, really interested me too, to think about. Like when you have, especially when you have these relationships that are formative and they span so much time, but perhaps like you actually were in that person's life more at an earlier point in your life, or you come in and out of each other's lives, and like how relevant do you remain to each other? How well do you really know the person? Like, can you move on from your perception of who they were and learn to understand who they are?
Right.
And that's like definitely like that journey for Ren was definitely like a personal journey for me. Like the awareness that you could have someone in your life that you feel like you knew so intensely well, and yet for other people they were a totally different person.
Yeah, it's like everybody's looking through a different lens, and
Yeah.
that's really strange. You also do this absolutely incredible thing that I loved in the book, where all of Ren's acquaintances and friends of Stuart, Ren imagines their funeral. I want to know, that was genius. I want to know where that idea came from and how much fun was it for you to write it?
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, no, that was like my favorite part of the book to write, practically. Those were fun. I have this like habit on the subway, or like if I'm waiting for someone in a restaurant when it's not a pandemic or whatever, and where I like look at people and I try to imagine their lives. And often I think because I'm somebody who really likes romantic comedies and romance and like love stories, I often think about the fact that somebody at some point was in love with that person. And like, who was it? And what was the scenario? And I like to sometimes pick like the least likely person you would think that about, you know? And so I think that's a little bit of where this was born. And I actually had a friend text me the other day who was reading the book and say, I need you to do my funeral. Like, what's my funeral? And I was like, oh no, I don't know if I could do that.
That's hilarious. You could have a little side business.
I know, I was thinking that. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I know that, yeah, it's really tempting to see people. A lot of times, my husband and I will people watch, and we'll see somebody coming out with this really bad shirt or something. And my husband will say, "Oh, he's hoping this is going to get him that date." And
Exactly.
it's really fun. It's really, really fun to do.
Yeah, right. And sometimes you'll look at people and say, like I do this with my husband. We'll be like, "What date are they on? Like, how many have those people been on?" You know?
Yeah, you get there's so much. I think that's a writer's mind. Like we're always sort of filling in the blanks and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, like, Ren realizes that everybody is kind of they want to own a piece of Stuart in some way. Why do you think that is? Is that their way of keeping him alive, or is it more their way of keeping themselves feeling alive and connected to the dead?
Yeah. I guess there's like the earnest, hopeful answer to that, and then there's like the cynical answer to that. And I don't know which one I actually believe. Maybe it depends on the person. Like, I think sometimes it's legitimately just, like a way to feel connected to someone, a way to have something that you can like look at and remember and be reminded to think about them once they're gone. Or in the best case scenario, it's something that you literally feel like you shared with them in some way, and it like holds their like a bit of their soul for you, you know? In the worst case scenario, I think it's like, you know, people want stuff. And also, I guess, to feel like they were deserving of something significant, you know?
Right.
Even if it's not about like monetary value or something like that. But, you know, like, I guess if you get something important, then it means you were important. You know, it means like you had an elevated role in the person's life and you deserved, you know, something.
So what was it like writing this book? Because there were parts that were really heartbreaking and there were parts that really made me laugh. Do you find yourself laughing? Do you find yourself crying? How do you know when you've written something that is real?
Yeah, that's such a good question.
Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
answer. So
I'll have to throw it back to you too, actually. I think that like I'm trying to I don't think that I laugh or cry while I'm writing or anything like that, but sometimes I will admit that I like read it back and I will crack myself up or make myself cry. Like I actually read a passage the other day because the amazing thing about this book, as opposed to like my other books, is that because it's about grief and a very specific like lens on grief that isn't talked about that much, I have like strangers reaching out to me wanting to like talk about grief. And it's kind of like a beautiful, amazing thing. And so someone got in touch with me and referenced a certain passage, and I read it, and I made myself cry. And then I turned to my husband and I was like, I made myself cry, and we both started laughing. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, do you feel, I mean, I would ask you also, like, I guess when I feel like something is working in a book in that way, it's almost like you can feel it click together like a puzzle piece, right? Like,
yes.
like you're like, you can like almost feel the rhythm of it or something. You're like,
Yes, that's a really good point, because there is definitely a rhythm. I was going to say it's when I know something's working, it's when I feel like I'm in the zone, but the zone is a rhythm. It's not anxiety. It's sort of, you're really in this parallel world, almost living it, and then I know it's real.
Yeah. And I think also when you're not stagnating, right? Like there are periods of time, at least when I'm writing, where I'm like, you know, you hit like a tough moment to get past, and just in terms of the writing process, like when you're in it in that way, it's not like that, right? It's just like
Right, no, it's different. It's very different. So we were talking a little bit before we got on screen, which was so fascinating to me, about how you write, because you don't outline, you just sort of write. So can you walk us through your process for this book? Like, what came first? The idea, well, obviously you were processing what happened to you with your friend, but just walk us through the process.
You know, I haven't said this because a couple of people have asked me a similar question, and I actually feel like I haven't given the total honest answer, and so I'm going to give it, which is that I have almost no memory of writing this book in a weird way. Like it's like I was like put it on the page and like forgot it or something. It's very strange. But that's also partially because before I had small children, I had like very specific parameters for what I needed in terms of my writing process. Like I had to write first thing when I woke up, and I needed like all these different sort of elements. I needed total quiet. Right. Once I had kids, it was like that wasn't possible.
That's out the window.
Yeah. So then I was like, oh, I have 15 minutes in the front seat of the car while my kids are asleep and my husband's driving. I think I'll write a chapter on my phone. You know, so I think it was a little bit more of a frenetic writing process than mine usually are. And I think, as I was saying to you, like often because I write without an outline, I wind up at the end with like holes that I need to fill, and it's like a bit of a mess. But in this case, it was less that way. Like I had the sort of structure of the alternating chapters from the beginning, and like the chapters in which Ren is speaking or writing to Stuart, those. I experienced the writing process of those as like a sort of breath of fresh air, like some oxygen. Right. And I hope that the reading process feels that way too, a bit. Like those are like a little sort of break almost.
So you didn't know anything about how the book would end when you were writing, like where you wanted to take Ren, or did you have sort of a vague idea, but you just didn't know how to get her there? Yeah,
I always have like some idea. I'm definitely not just like writing blind, hoping. I definitely, and then I'll have like scenes that pop into my head that are later down the line that I'll like jot down notes for. I just don't like formally outline. But I definitely, I mean, I like a happy ending. So there was certain things I knew were going to happen a certain way without spoiling anything.
So were you a little kid who wrote? Like, is that what you were 8 years old, you thought, oh, I really want to be a writer? Or did that sort of take you by surprise?
So I always loved to write. I was actually just thinking I had these, I went to a really small, sort of quirky, private, like way progressive private school in New York, sort of before private schools were quite as like, swanky as they are now. And at that school, they just always put me in the homeroom, we called them clusters, of English teachers, like always. And I'm sure it's because I loved, that was what I gravitated towards, but like I literally never had anything but an English teacher as my homeroom teacher. And then, and I always loved to write, and my mother writes and my father writes. And
okay. So they must have encouraged you in your journey, right?
Definitely. Well, so when I was really little, my mom, who later became a contemporary art curator and a museum director, when I was young, she was an art critic. And so when I had an essay due, I would write it, and then we would sit down and she would go through the editing process with me as the way her old school magazine editor did it with her. So we'd like read every sentence and she'd be like, "This is awkward. How can you fix it?" And
that's great. That's fabulous.
She taught me to write, and it took hours, but I loved it for some reason. Like I definitely,
I would love it too.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so definitely that gave me confidence and also made me, love writing in a certain way. And then she tells a story though about when I was like 15, she turned to me and she said, "Maybe when you grow up, you'll be a writer." And I said, "No way. No way. That's too hard." Which I'm impressed that I thought it was hard or knew. And then I sort of forgot about it. And even though I was sort of the editor of my literary magazine in high school, and then I went to college and I was like a writing tutor, and, but then as I was telling you, I worked in film and then I worked in politics, and I sort of forgot about it. And then I always said I wanted to work with writers, but I sort of like forgot that I could be the writer,
Wow.
And then I finally, while I was at the last sort of office job, as we were talking about, that I have had, I really didn't like it. I was very unhappy, and I started writing a personal essay, and I just was like, loved it. And so then I pressured this woman I know who knew a like editor at this yoga magazine to introduce us and let me write this essay, and I did. And when it came out, I went to the newsstand and I picked it up and I saw my name and I was like, "I'm done."
Oh yeah. That'll do it. That'll absolutely do it.
Did you know you wanted to be a writer? Like, was that something that you knew from when you were?
Excuse me, say that again.
Did you know you wanted to be a writer? Like,
oh yeah, but my story was that I was just this bullied little Jewish kid in a very religious Christian neighborhood, and I had asthma and I was made fun of. So writing for me initially was escape. And then like you, when I did it, I felt, I really love this. Mm-hmm. This is wonderful. Maybe I can do this. And I just wanted to. I just really, really wanted to. I want to know, like, how did you work in movies, and you also worked in branding, which we talked about before we got on here. Yeah. And you're being a journalist. How do you think that informs your writing, or doesn't it? Do you use like a different brain power when you do that, or a different state of mind?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I'm doing like, when I'm editing articles or I'm doing like brand writing, it feels like a relief to not have to use like that much of my brain. It's a more like automatic function. Mm-hmm. But I do think that they inform each other. Like, it's sort of in my nature in general to like make cultural references a lot. Like, it's just sort of the way that I move around the world. And so, but I think that my time in the film industry probably informed that also. And it definitely taught me a lot about structure, because when I worked in film, I was a development exec. So I was working.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was working with writers on screenplays, and to be honest, my husband.
So wait. So if your filmmaking stuff taught you a lot about structure, but in your writing of novels, you don't use structure. So do you use the structure when you're done writing and you sort of look at it and see how it looks as a whole?
I feel like it gave me an inherent sense of structure.
Right. Okay.
Like in the same way that watching a million movies or reading a million books also just sort of, you can like feel it, like the arc. But there have been times, my husband is a screenwriter in part. And he is a very like plot driven writer, which I am not. That's the other thing. And so sometimes there have been times where I really can't figure out a fix. Like I've written the book, the ending is not working. I don't know what the problem is. Where I've turned to him and said, "What do you think?" And he said to me for my second book, he said to me, "Well, do you want me to tell you how it would work if it was a movie instead of a book?" And I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Boom, boom, boom, boom. This would be."
Was that what you did? And so did you follow what he said? Oh, will he help me?
Exactly. Well, he said it and was like, "That's it." Right. And my editor hasn't been able to figure it out. He just, yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. Do you show your pages to other people besides your husband before it gets to your agent?
I do generally. I used to have like a few very specific people I sent the manuscript to, but then they all had kids, and now I feel bad bothering them.
Right.
So I have a writing group.
That changes everything. I want to talk about that. Oh, I know what I wanted to talk about. So I always wonder if so you finished this book and everybody loves it and it's great. And so you're starting on another one. Do you feel any sort of writer's amnesia where you're thinking, how did I do that before and how am I going to do it again? Or do you feel that you learned a lot from competitive grieving and you can apply it to your next work?
I mean, I love writer's amnesia as a concept. I really do. I mean, I guess what I feel like, I wrote my first book using doing National Novel Writing Month.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, what was that like? I've heard like pros and cons about it.
Yeah. I think how it goes is completely dependent on like what kind of writer you are and what you need. And like the function of it for me, it's like it helps you get out of your own way. So before that, I guess a couple times I really hadn't tried to write fiction, is the truth. And I was like, I want to try this. I have like the beginning of an idea. But I felt like if I would just keep, I would just start and then I would stop and be like, this is a terrible idea. And they basically, the whole concept is that you can't stop and you can't edit. You can't go back. You just have to like vomit it out, basically. And you can't outline. And so I think that really worked for me because from an anxiety perspective, getting it all just out and then going back is like a lot less stressful for me. So I guess what I'd say is like, in some ways I feel like, no, how did I sit down and write a book every time? But I also feel like I know myself. I'm just like, I just need to sit down and like do it and just not look back. But it's scary, as it always is.
Scary. Do you feel like your ideas marinate and change? Because a lot of times, I mean, it takes me about 4 years to write a book, and I'm always amazed that by the time I'm done, it doesn't look like the book I started with, because the ideas just sort of soaked and they became something else. Do you feel that way, or do you always feel like you sort of know what you're doing?
Well, that's so interesting because, like, I guess in an ideal world, that would always happen and it would evolve into something like better and more complex, right? But like, and so I guess like, I definitely feel like with this book, I had a somewhat simple idea of what it would be. And there was like complexity that crept into it that I definitely did not anticipate.
So what surprises happened in this book for you? Like, what did you learn? I mean, were you still grieving when you wrote this book? And did it help to write this book? And what, by surprise, I just sort of mean, like, what did you, there's always in writing a moment when you're writing and you realize, oh my God, this was a question I needed to answer for myself.
Yeah.
And writing this story did that. So what was it for you?
Yeah, I think like I was definitely still grieving when I wrote the book. It definitely it taught me a bit of empathy, I would say, for people in their grieving process, even if their grieving process is not ideal for the
Right.
people around them. At some point, someone, I don't even remember who it was, said to me, everybody just wants to be seen or like feel seen.
That's right.
And I thought that was like, that like really resonated and stayed with me, and something that like, I don't know if I would have really been able to wrap my mind around having not written the book, and like thought through some of those ideas. But also something that I really haven't talked about very much, but is really important to me, is this idea of friendship.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, and like these, the thing of competitive grieving, it's a part of the grieving process that it gets talked about less than, unless it's like a family situation with like inheritance or something. But just sort of like the push and pull of wanting to feel recognized as somebody important in somebody's life and they're not there to recognize you. And so the sort of clawing to try to get recognition. But one of the things, so talking about that sort of newer concept, at least new to me, was like really interesting for me to think about. And I also, there's this part of the book, which I feel like no one else will care about probably, that is like always, right? Like the part you love is like the part like nobody else pays attention to. But there's this part in the book where it's like a flashback. And it's about how Ren, at some point in her history with Stuart, went to LA to visit him when he was like starting to like have some fame. Mm-hmm. And she goes out with him for the night, and he basically ignores her, even though she's there to see him. And she walks away feeling like, hurt. And then she never talks about it with him, and they resume their relationship like as if it never happened. And for me, that was such a true experience, and one that like I don't feel like people acknowledge very much, because it's kind of uncomfortable and embarrassing and awkward. And so there were just pieces like that I feel like I worked through the idea of in a way that was like it helpful to me and important to me.
Yeah, I also want to ask you a little bit more about the whole issue of friendship and how friends can get us through it. It seems to me that I never really realized how important friends were until the hard times came. Mm-hmm. Because it's so easy to just go out with girlfriends or guy friends and have a good time and laugh, and that's fine. But it's very different when you're having a dark night of the soul and you call somebody up at 4 a.m. in the morning. Are they going to take your call? Are they going to be there for you? Has your notion of friendship changed because of your grieving?
Yeah, I think my notion of friendship has changed also for a lot of reasons over the last couple of years. I mean, I think it probably has for a lot of us, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like I found myself pretty surprised by the people who I felt like I either missed or gravitated towards during the pandemic, versus people who I would have considered really significant in my life, who like I didn't feel like I needed to see, So the notion of things changing, and going through different stages of life and friendship, and of that like maybe being okay. Like the idea that you could, instead of getting angry and feeling like somebody wronged each other, just feeling like we're just like in very different places, and that's totally fine. And like, maybe we'll come back together at some point. But like, and of course there's a massive difference between your friends and then like being thrust into, as Ren is in the book, into the midst of somebody else's friend group.
Right.
No, because you've known them for years, but who aren't really your people.
Right.
So I feel like
I also want to ask you in terms of parenthood, because there's a lot of stuff, I've heard a whole lot of stuff about women writers saying they were not going to have kids because, whoops, there goes the novel. And I've heard other writers say that parenthood was the best thing they ever did because it actually encouraged creativity. As parents, I agree with the latter. How has parenting changed your writing?
I mean, when I held off on having kids like a bit longer than I would have because for that exact reason. And I remember saying to my dad, who's a visual artist, well, I just don't. First, my first book, I remember walking around saying it was my baby, just like so weird and obnoxious. But I was like, it's my baby. I remember saying to my dad, I don't really. I want to wait to have kids because I feel like once I have kids, I'm not going to have any time to write. And him saying to me, you have no idea how much you can do and achieve in a small window of time.
Right.
And that has definitely proved very true. I mean, both things are true. Like, kids force you to stay on your toes all the time. And you're being exposed to completely different things than you would otherwise be exposed to. And it makes at least for me, it makes my world richer in many ways. But it's hard to find windows of quiet. It's hard to find windows of time sometimes. And that is a true, and when you get in the zone and you just get into one of those modes where you just want to write, and you can't, you have to stop because you have to make dinner or whatever it is. Like, it's hard. It's not, it's a challenging reality.
It's hard, but don't you find that it stops you from procrastinating? I mean, if I have a whole free day, I was like, oh, I should go look on Facebook or whatever, see what's going on. Whereas if I have deadlines, you focus. You get it. Do you have the cover of your book with you? I have the book upstairs and I've got to bring it downstairs. And I want to talk about the cover because it's so absolutely phenomenal. It's a great cover. It's a great cover. Look at that. That is fabulous. I love everything about it. The typeface, the rooster. I want to talk about covers. So did you have input in this? Have you always loved your covers? What do you think of this cover?
I love talking about covers. It's so fascinating to me. I always want to hear different authors' stories about their covers. My first book ever, I was presented with an initial cover that I hated so much.
Oh, really? Well, what was it?
It looked like I showed it to my sister, who I'm very close with, and she and I had the exact same reaction without having discussed it. We both were like, it looks like something you would buy in a mall, plastic accessory store, like Claire's or something like that. It was a horrible, Sex and the City tween ripoff.
Oh, no.
With photographs of girls in cheesy outfits with Balenciagas. It was, and they said to me, I got an email from them presenting it, and they were like, we think this is really chic and cool in New York. And I was like, no, you don't. No. And I remember texting or emailing my agent and being like, I know I'm so lucky to have a book published at all, but I will literally be embarrassed in this.
Right, with a cover like that. Oh, I know.
So I sent them this really long email with all the reasons why I thought it was a mistake from a marketing perspective. Not I didn't like it, but these are the reasons why I think it's a mistake. And then I sent them all of these covers that I thought worked better.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and they came back to me with a cover that I really liked. I mean, maybe even liked more than I would have liked because it was just not the other cover. So that was, and then my second book, they presented me with a cover, and I was like, done. I love it.
Oh, that's great. That doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't, right?
Titles either. I had my editor name my book once because they kept rejecting title after title, and I couldn't think of any more than 200.
Yeah. I thought that with titles as well. Totally. And then with this book, this is the anomaly of all books, I feel because I had the title from the beginning. There was no way I was going to let them change it because I just felt like it's so well encapsulated what the
beautiful colors, everything. It pops. It really pops. And it's the perfect cover for a book with the word grieving in it. Because you look at it and you think, oh, this is going to be fun. You know, that's how could you not think that with a rooster separated?
And that's the challenge, right? Is like when you have a book, how do you communicate that something is at once visually? How do you communicate it that something is at once sad and funny?
Right.
Like, but I think she did a beautiful job. She gave me a bunch of options. We did work on it a bit together, and she ultimately did this, and I really love it.
It's great. It's a perfect cover. Do we have any questions for Nora? Okay, up. Yes, mom writes, dad writes, husband writes. Do you have any siblings that have no idea what you're all talking about? What a great question. I love that.
No, my sister also is a really good writer. I have a sister, and I guess it was inevitable. My parents both work in the art world. My sister works in the theater. And my parents, growing up, my parents said to me, like, just don't become an artist. And so I became a writer, which is just as bad. But yeah, I have a sister, and she's also I guess also was taught to write in a way by my mom, and is also a great writer.
That's great. That's great. It's like a dynasty of writers.
Yeah, and actually, I should say she is one of my readers. Like, she is.
That's great. That's really good. Yeah. What about your kids? Are they interested in writing, or do they know what you do?
Yeah, my 4-year-old is a little bit like, because he's 4, but my 7-year-old was really excited about this book coming out. The day it came out, I picked her up she was in a remote class, but in a pod. So she went to someone else's house and was with the same, like, 5 other kids the whole time. So I went to go pick her up, and she had spent part of the day making a book too. And she was like, look, I wrote a book also. I also have a book coming out. So.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And when my son Max was 8, he wanted to write a novel himself, so he wrote a couple pages. And we said, you know what? We're going to give us the whole novel treatment. So we made him write a little bio, and I got blurbs from all my writer friends.
Oh my God, really?
Author picture, and he gave input on the cover, and then we sold it for like 10 cents, and he made about $5, which was great. And we went to the bookstore, and I said, oh, this is the life of a writer, but remember, you might not always get this much money from your book.
It's true.
Oh, we do. What advice would you give an aspiring author just starting out? Also, if you change anything on your path, what would it be?
Well, the advice I would give an aspiring author just starting out, I think it would just be to go into it understanding that nothing that you create is going to be for everyone, and that's okay. Continue to write no matter what. Write when you think you're writing something terrible, still just keep writing, write through it. And ultimately, when you first go out, once you have something that you feel like you're ready to take out into the world, which is a terrifying thing on many levels, know that if the first few responses you get are no's, that is always how it goes, that is part of the process, and that it shouldn't discourage you from continuing, because it's difficult, but that's part of it, and ultimately often makes you a better writer.
I love that quote, that nothing you create is going to be for everyone. And I think that's important to realize that some people are not your readers.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that what you have is not worthwhile or that you have talent. It's just that some people, they're not going to want to read your books, and that's not a slight on you.
Yeah, yeah. And this just might not be their thing. Or like sometimes we all get into headspaces where like during the pandemic, I was like, I can't read anything heavy. Just we get into certain headspaces, and it has to be the right time and the right thing. And in terms of something I would change on my path, I guess that I wish that I had realize, I mean, I don't know if there's anything I would change, because I feel like I feel grateful for where I am, knock on wood. But I guess if I was going to change anything, it would just be that I wish that I had realized I wanted to be a writer a little bit earlier, and that I could have like gone to college and just like studied literature and writing and spent 4 years like just honing that craft. And sometimes I just think that sounds like so wonderful. So I guess that's the one thing.
So do you read I mean, your reviews for this book have been phenomenal. They've been like so great. So do you read your reviews, and how do you read them? I mean, do you read them to see, oh, is there something I can improve on? Or do you read them to make yourself feel good? Or
to make yourself feel bad? I'm like, knock on wood again, but the reviews for this book have been
phenomenal,
very positive, and I feel really, really lucky that has been the case. I am aware that at any moment it could just shift. But in the past, I have had trouble not reading like the Goodreads reviews and like and I have at times like been upset. The thing is you read something really kind about your book and it makes you feel wonderful. But if you read something really bad, that's what stays with you.
Right. That's right.
So like, that's, I think, one of the major reasons why you're really not meant to read them if you can help it. I have had a lot of self-control about it this time. I have not, I've definitely read like the ones that I've been tagged on Instagram, like bookstagrammers who have like tagged me. I've read those, and a lot of them have made me really like touched and happy. But I've been pretty good about like not going on Amazon and Goodreads too much. And
yeah. The whole review thing is odd. I mean, it's kind of, reviews are great for marketing. They make people aware of your books. But in terms of, helping you be a better writer, sometimes I always wish, well, why didn't you suggest that to me when I was writing the book? Or why did I know that? So it's kind of, if you look at them as just, well, it's just to get the word out. And also, they did a study and they found that most people, when they read reviews, they look at the reviews for the plot. A lot of times say, is this a book that I might like to read? Yeah. Rather than whether somebody is gushing over you, though certainly that helps.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I mean, yeah. I remember I got a review for, I don't even remember which, it was like one of my other books, and the person just wrote no.
Oh my.
Those kind of reviews like are, when they're so bad like that, and it's just like a person in the world, it's not like a publication, it's kind of funny. But again, like, it's just, I guess it brings us back to not everything, nothing is for everybody,
Yeah, I got a really nasty, it was a reader review, but it was nasty because she was really upset that I had written about infidelity because she thought that shouldn't be talked about. So it's sort of, why did you read the book then?
Yeah, that was, yeah. Also, like, I don't really think anything is off limits when it comes to novels. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah, that is the whole point.
Right? We're mining the depths of things that you don't usually mine the depths of.
We have time for one more question, which is, what are you working on next? Are you okay about talking about it?
Yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I don't have that much to say, to be honest. I'm actually finishing up a nonfiction book that I'm co-writing with someone now.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's like a whole nother bag, so that's its own thing. But and then I've started a new book. I'm a little bit like unsure of whether I'm gonna stick with it. This one, like, I think this other idea that's sort of nagging at me, but it's a bit of like a road trip story. It's like sort of travels. And I think in some ways, maybe during the pandemic, I was like, get me out of here. So it's a story that includes movement. But I've been wanting to write a road trip story that's like an exploration of someone's personal history. for a while, and so that's sort of the basis for the book. But it's would also generally have a romance in it.
Who just love road stories?
Yeah. Well, I tend to write books that are like these delayed coming of age stories, and so it's always about someone being stuck and needing to like break out of it. So that's what this is too.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. I just loved your book. I love talking to you. And I want to thank everybody out there. Please, you can order Nora's book at your favorite indie. She happens to love Books Are Magic. And I forgot the other one in LA.
Oh, and well, Book Soup in LA, and then my around the corner bookstore is Terrace Books in Brooklyn.
Terrace, right. So do that. You're helping the community. You're helping the bookstore too. And thank you all so much. This will be on our YouTube station. And I want to thank our genius producer, Robert, for helping us here. And thank you, everyone. So we'll see you at another time on A Blaze. Thank you. Good evening.